welcome back. How was the party? Good. The makeup worked. Yeah, okay. Oh well, at least you had fun. So, as I promised earlier, I would show you this new book I have behind me here, which has some details about which has a write-up about the Salem Witch Trials in the 1600s. So why don't you get yourself nice and settled? I'll get you your blanket. And just wrap it around you. Just wrap it around you here. Okay. And most importantly, the pillow mist. I've been using this all the time now. So just close your eyes. I won't spray it on your face, but I'll just spray it around you. Maybe a couple more. Okay. The smell of this is so amazing. I've probably told you a couple of times before. But anyway, that's going to fill up. Yes, I can feel it. It's already filling up the space with this relaxing ingredients. Okay. So here I have this very intriguing book I found at a thrift shop for $2. It looks like it's had a bit of wear. A few times the coffee's been set on the front of here. But what it's called is The Devil and All His Works by Dennis Wheatley. And I saw it in the bookshelf. And that title sort of had me intrigued. I thought, what is this dark book of magic? And so I started reading it. And then an aeroplane flew by. And interrupted this whole video. But we will just keep going. But it actually has some very interesting practices of magic, good and bad. But it's basically everything that has been considered as sort of alternative spiritual practices. So witchcraft, occult, necromancy, if that's how you say it. But it has a lot of different stories of magic and practices used in the past. I guess what the author considers to be the work of the devil. But in the case of the Salem witches, which is something I think we're all maybe quite fascinated by, and I don't know how many of you have seen the play or the film, The Crucible, but it's pretty accurate in my opinion of what actually happened. Like the characters' names and everything are the same. So I'll just get in and read you this story they have about the Salem Witch Trials in Salem, Massachusetts. The Salem Witch Trials. The American colonies had their share of witch cults, although Satanism there was much less prevalent than in Europe. However, as we have seen, the most ferocious persecutions of witchcraft in Britain took place when the country was dominated by the Puritans. So it's not surprising that witch hunting was carried out more ruthlessly in Puritan New England than in the southern colonies. The extraordinary courage and endurance displayed by the early settlers was due to their absolute faith in God, His word, and the rightness of the strict adherence to the letter of it is laid down by the fanatical John Calvin, so that they would not tolerate anyone ever questioning a passage in the Bible. From early in the 17th century, there had been a certain number of witch trials in Boston and other places, but the notorious affair at Salem did not occur until 1692, and it had some most unusual features. It began in Salem Village in the house of Reverend Samuel Parris. He had a 9-year-old daughter, Betty, a nervous, introspective child, and a niece of 11, Abigail Williams, a bold and mischievous girl who dominated her cousin. Parris had lived for a while in Barbados and had brought back with him 2 slaves, John Indian, a Negro who worked mostly outside the house, and his wife Tituba, a Negro Carib half-caste who cooked and cleaned. Of Mrs. Parris we know little, except that she was very devout and spent most of her time doing good works in the village. The children were really mothered by old Tituba, who adored them. Steeped in her voodoo beliefs, inherited from Africa and the Caribbean, Tituba talked to the girls about them, and for their amusement taught them how to cast some probably more or less harmless spells. So proud were they of this secret knowledge that they boasted of it to several of their older friends, Mary Walcott, Elizabeth Booth, and Susanna Sheldon, and later to several others, including Ann Putnam, the malicious daughter of a neurotic, scandal-loving mother, and with the result that before long, old Tituba's quarters became a real witch's kitchen. What actually went on there, nobody is now ever likely to know. But it must have been something pretty nasty. At first Betty, then Abigail, and in turn all the other girls became possessed. They suffered from vacancy of mind, fits of dizziness, then crawled about on all fours, making horrible animal noises. Prayers proved of no avail. The girls screamed as though touched with a red-hot iron at the sound of a sacred word. A Dr. Craigs was called in, but could be of no help, and he declared that the evil hand was on them. So Parris appealed for spiritual assistance, and 2 ministers Nicholas Noyes and John Hale arrived in the village. Repeatedly they asked all of the children who their tormentors were, but could get no reply. Mary Walcott's aunt then resorted to stratagem. Suspecting Tituba, she persuaded her to make a witch cake from an old country recipe. It consisted of rye meal mixed with the urine of the children. When Paris learned this and charged his daughter with being a party to it, she went into such terrible hysterics that it was feared she would die. But out of Betty and her friends, they at last got omissions that enabled them to charge Tituba with witchcraft. A slovenly creature named Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, a woman of poverty who was suspected of immortality, were also charged. Two magistrates, John Hathorne, a true zealot, and Jonathan Corwin, a milder man, were sent from Salem village to examine the witches. But the law in Massachusetts at the time was primitive. The concept that an accused is innocent until proven guilty had not even been thought of. The prisoners were allowed no counsel to defend them, and it was enough for a witness to declare that he had seen the shape of the accused riding through the air on a broomstick for him to be believed. However stoutly the poor wretch in the dock denied it. Tituba was fortunate. The Reverend Mr. Paris thrashed her again and again until her slave mentality saved her. She suddenly realized that to escape further punishment, she must do as he wished, tell him the sorts of things he'd hoped to hear, that she had dealings with the devil. A tall man, she claimed, had come to her, told her that he was God and that she must serve him for 6 years. He had brought her a book. There were 9 names in it, among those of Osborne and Sarah Good. She had flown to Sabbaths with the man, accompanied by a hog, 2 red cats, the winged head of a cat that was a creature of Osborne's. The witches' shapes had tried to force her to harm Betty and Abigail, but she had resisted them. All this was eagerly accepted by the court. It was evident that poor Tituba had been deceived by the devil, and was the innocent victim of the witches. This was born out of her also becoming possessed, rolling her eyes, frothing at the mouth, and screaming that a demon was tormenting her for having spoken. Her husband, John Indian, was a quick learner. He roared, blasphemed, and flung himself about on the floor of the courtroom in apparently paroxysms of agony. So obviously he was another victim of the horror that had come to Salem village. What's that photo there? Next couple of pages. Hysteria seized upon the Mr. Reverend Paris's congregation. A dozen people said, and some perhaps honestly believed, that they had seen the shapes of others against whom they had a grudge, sticking pins into poppets and supping up the unholy sacrament of red bread and bloody wine. Rebecca Nurse, a most respectable old lady, greatly beloved by her family, was dragged from a bed of sickness to be charged. John Proctor, an honest farmer, had the temerity to declare that the girls were liars and that their hysteria self-induced for the pleasure they got out of having drawn so much attention to themselves, which was in part certainly true. The result was that he was arrested as a witch and his property was confiscated before he had even been tried. For every trial, the girls were brought into court, and their unchecked behaviour had a shattering effect upon the accused. If a prisoner lifted his eyes to the heaven, they all lifted theirs. If he blew his nose, they all blew theirs, and so on. If he denied a charge, they created pandemonium, howling him down and going into hysterical fits. Still worse, he was in effect tried by them. One by one, the demented young creatures were carried to the prisoner, and he was forced to take the hand of each in turn. If she continued to rave and twist, he was innocent, but if she became quiet, it was assumed that he had taken back into himself the demon he had sent out to torment her, and so was guilty. A statement was made that the Sabbaths were held in a meadow, and that had been leased to Paris. Which is normally always avoided at night because it was plagued by a host of croaking frogs. It was said that a horn was sounded there, which was inaudible to honest folk, but could be heard by every witch in Essex County. In Andover, Salisbury, and Salmon Falls, they all mounted their broomsticks and came screaming through the air to a Sabbath. When they had taken unholy communion, the devil delivered a sermon telling them that they must get enough converts to overthrow the church. Then the good old times would come back. There were again to be jollifications at Christmas, dancing round the maypole, racing cockfights, and all the delights that the Puritan New Englanders had forsworn. The girls were constantly seeing shapes all over the place, and so unshakable had their elders' belief in them become that at the children's direction they actually stabbed with their swords and threw pitchforks at the empty air where these shapes were supposed to be. A new governor, Sir William Phipps, arrived from England, and with him increased Mather, the father of Cotton Mather, and later president of Harvard. Mather had been prominent in the Boston Witch Trials, but Phipps was interested only in getting together an expedition against the French in Canada. Having decreed that all those in prison accused of witchcraft should be chained up in their cells, he left the business of trying them to his jurists. A special court of Oyer and Terminer was formed with the deputy governor, William Stoughton, as president, and 6 other judges. People in the neighborhood of Salem, who feared to be cried out, as it was called, began to seek safety in flight. Among them was John Willard, the deputy constable who had arrested several of the witches. In a sudden fit of disgust, he turned on the girls, accused them of being fakes, and cried out, "Hang them all! Hang them!" The girls got back at him by declaring that they had seen his shape strangling his own nephew who had just died. Willard fled, but failed to get any distance before he was caught, chained up in prison, and accused of having bewitched to death 11 other people. Suddenly the girls decided on the identity of the man who played the part of the devil at the Sabbaths. It was, they declared, the Reverend George Burroughs, who had been living at Salem Village 10 years earlier. Shocked as the magistrates were that a minister should be involved, they did not hesitate. The sheriffs were dispatched to the distant parish where Burroughs was living. Striding into his house, they dragged him from the table in the middle of a meal and hauled him off to Salem. To his amazement, he was accused of murdering a number of soldiers who had been killed near his parish while fighting Indians. Not physically, of course. As with the crimes of which the other witches were accused, it was his shape that had done these deeds. What possible defense could he put up to prove his innocence? Poor old Rebecca Nurse was brought to trial. Her unblemished reputation stood her in good stead. Her family and numerous friends had the courage to testify. She was found not guilty. Instantly, the courtroom had become bedlam. The girls howled and tore their hair, screaming that the old lady was guilty. Rebecca was brought back into the court. The jury was told to think again. This time, they reversed their verdict. On Tuesday, July 19th, she was one of 5 women hanged on Gallows Hill. The terror spread. Scores of people were cried out. Under Stoughton's presidency, the court administered a travesty of justice. Prisoners who confessed could hope for clemency. Those who stoutly denied their guilt were condemned. On September 22nd, 8 more were hanged, including one Mary Esty. Now there occurred the most amazing happening in the whole awful business. On that day, Mary Etsy's shape appeared to a servant girl named Mary Herrick and said to her, "I am going upon the ladder to be hanged for a witch, but I am innocent, and before a 12-month be past, you shall believe it." Shortly afterwards, her ghost caused Mary Herrick to denounce the wife of the minister John Hale. He knew the charge to be utterly false, and suddenly realized how many others of the accused might well be innocent. This proved to be the beginning of a return to sanity. The governor came back from the Canadian border. He was shocked to find that 100 people were chained up in prison awaiting trial for witchcraft. He decreed that in future, spectral evidence should be inadmissible. This cut the ground from under the feet of those tireless persecutors, Stoughton, Noyes, and Paris. Accused after accused was found not guilty. The movement collapsed. Out of this terrible madness, only one thing emerges to the credit of the persecutors. Unlike the Calvinists and Holy Inquisition in Europe, at least the American witch hunters hanged their victims. They neither tortured them nor burnt them at the stake. And that, my friends, is the Salem Witch Trials passage from The Devil in All His Works. And as some of you know, the story of Hocus Pocus was set in 1963, which is a year after, 1693, which is the year after the 1692 Salem Witch Trials. And then Winnie, Sarah, and Mary come back into 1993, 300 years later. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I am certainly enjoying this book. It's very interesting. And I hope you have a wonderful Halloween and that you enjoy a bit of this kind of magical talk. It's always fun around this time of year. And speaking of Hocus Pocus, the saga may continue because I think I may just play a little lullaby later, which will complete the Halloween series for the year. Anyway, take care, my friend, and I'll see you again soon.